one person's idea of a good time is another person's idea of harassment, and it's not about the intent, it's about the end result, right? Doesn't mean that I meant to harass you. I did, because you felt that way. And that's where the employment practices, you may hear me just flip and call it EPL, but EPL is there to protect the business owner, because at the end of the day, you're the one that's responsible for the activities that are going on in your establishment.
Thanks for tuning back into the podcast. This is a topic today that is so important to this industry and to small business and restaurants in general. It's all about the ins and outs of insurance and the risks and all the different types of coverages that are now more important than ever in your business. I'm speaking with John Cassetta, and he is the head of restaurant insurance solutions for a company called CoverWallet. We're going to cover all the risks, all the solutions, and the variances in cost based on the risk and where you are in the country. We're going to talk about cyber attacks and all the big risks right now that are happening that are seemingly beyond your control, and even some of the unexpected things that you might not be thinking about, but certainly all the ones that are super important for your business. So stay tuned. Thanks to the sponsors of this week's episode. Thanks to our audience for tuning in. On with the episode.
You're tuned in to the Restaurant Rockstars Podcast. Powerful ideas to rock your restaurant. Here's your host, Roger Bodwin.
People go to restaurants for lots of reasons. For fun, celebration, for family, for lifestyle. What the customer doesn't know is the thousands of details it takes to run a great restaurant. This is a high-risk, high-fail business. It's hard to find great staff. Costs are rising and profits are disappearing. It's a treacherous road, and smart operators need a professional guide. I'm Roger. I've started many highly successful, high-profit restaurants that I've now sold for millions of dollars. I'm passionate about helping other owners and managers not just succeed, but knock it out of the park. I created a game-changing system, and it's filled with everything I've learned in over 20 years running super profitable, super fun restaurants. Everything from creating high-profit menu items and cost controls to staff training where your teams serve and sell, to marketing hooks, money-maximizing tips, and efficiencies across your operation. What does this mean to you? More money to invest in your restaurant, to hire a management team, time freedom, and peace of mind. You don't just want to run a restaurant. You want to dominate your competition and create a lasting legacy. Join the Academy and I'll show you how it's done.
Let me introduce you to GoTab. GoTab is a restaurant commerce platform with a suite of solutions, including POS, online ordering, mobile pay, and even a kitchen management tool. Now, you know I'm all about maximizing sales, but did you know that operators using the GoTab platform see 35 to 50% higher check averages and 20% higher tips? Now, that can be a real game changer for your bottom line. The GoTab platform empowers you, the operator, to run a leaner and more profitable operation. Listen to what GoTab customers have to say. Kent says with real-time analytics, we can manage our plate cost. When we switched to GoTab, we were able to lower labor cost and increase wages. Ian shares that our chefs and managers love to use GoTab. The back end is well thought out, intuitive, and easy to use. While Keem adds that the GoTab team is always available for us and extremely responsive. GoTab's flexible, easy-to-use solutions will simplify your operations, putting you in control of your restaurant's success. Visit gotab.com/rockstars today to sign up for a free demo and get qualified to receive a complimentary meal. Again, that's gotab.com/rockstars. John, thanks for being here. Welcome to the show today. How are you?
Doing great. Appreciate you having me.
I appreciate you being here. So we're going to cover a topic that is super, super important for our audience and for restaurants and small business in general. And it's all about the ins and outs of insurance. And you are a specialist in operations insurance and that sort of thing. But my first question is usually about the hospitality backstory of my guest. And I'm curious, did you ever work in a restaurant or a hospitality business before you started your insurance career?
I sure did. I think just about everybody I knew cut their teeth in the food service world when we were younger. And, I always enjoyed it. Before I talk about me, I'm going to mention I have two sons that both work in the food service industry right now. And largely because I steered them in that direction, saying there's no better way to learn, the ins and outs of a good work ethic than to work in food service. Once I did that, in high school and college, as my career was developing in the insurance world, I still worked multiple jobs because one, I had to, and two, I enjoyed it, and continue to work in food service for many, many years.
So you've got experience then, and this is a business of passion. It's a business of relationships, and you can carry your life experiences along with you on what you're doing now, and you can really help restaurants. What are your sons doing in the restaurant space right now?
They're both working in a kitchen in a local microbrewery.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
All right. So gaining skills, moving forward. Cool. Well, thanks for sharing that. That's always helpful. So let's talk about what the most common risks are that face our audience in the restaurant business. Obviously, we've got operators of all sizes. We've got some that just lease a space. We've got those that own the real estate, and those risks are different and those coverages are different. But let's talk about some of the common risks, and then we're going to take a deeper dive into the whole subject.
Yeah, and perfect segue. You mentioned some people own the building, some people lease the building. So not all risks are created equal, but in both of those scenarios, they have stuff. Stuff's my technical term for the things in the restaurant. So unless you are leasing everything and you don't have any ownership stake whatsoever in your restaurant equipment, your tables and chairs, odds are pretty good you've got stuff. You also have the inventory, the food that's in the refrigeration and freezer, where you lose power and you lose all of your inventory. That's stuff. You want to make sure that you're protecting against those things, because one issue could knock you out of business almost immediately. Yeah,
and lose $10,000 at one time, perhaps, easily, if you got a fairly large walk-in and that sort of thing.
Large walk-in, and think about what might be in there. If you're specializing in some higher end foods, the grocery bill is a little bit more expensive than if you're dealing in something that's not as perishable.
So there's a lot of different, you might call it an a la carte list, and we're going to talk a lot of the major ones. But now that we're on this subject, I think you're talking about business interruption. And does that impact losing $10,000 in the walk-in if for some unforeseen event happens and now you shut down, but your power goes out for a week? And that happened to me a long time ago. And that's right, another story. But tell us about business interruption and what might be covered there, because I know that was an important one that I had.
Business interruption is something that I think a lot of people don't always think in terms of what the exposure could potentially be. If you have something happen like a kitchen fire, you're immediately worried about the building if it's yours, the equipment if it's yours, and what that means to replace those items. But now you have to think about the fact that you no longer have a source of income coming in, and you still have bills to pay. You might still have to pay the lease. You might still have to pay your employees. You might have to pay the insurance bill, the utilities bill. All of those things are, still expected to be paid, and you don't have an income stream. So if it was, a situation that was a covered loss, like a kitchen fire, business interruption coverage is critical to be able to keep your doors open and reopen when you do things, the right way to get it, rebuilt, replaced, whatever it is.
Is there a dollar amount that you would assign to a particular restaurant client that is about interruption, especially if a restaurant is brand new, they haven't been operating before, there's no history of a track record? Okay, in July of last year, we did $300,000 in revenue, whatever it is, and now we have an idea of what we're going to be losing. If there's no track record, how do you assign a coverage to it and then a claim repay potential?
If there's no prior history to go on, hopefully there's a business plan where you can at least have your forecasted revenues, right?
Okay. Yeah. Projections.
You know what your projections are going to be. So we're at least going to have that conversation there to come up with something to have for business interruption. As time progresses, now you have that track record. So knock on wood, nothing happens your first month where you have nothing to go on. But at least you have an idea going forward what your revenues are looking at like, and you'll be able to, better forecast as you move along once you've opened your door.
Okay. What are some of the other things that are prime importance for a restaurant to have? Because again, we're talking about an a la carte list, and these things add up, and we want to bundle the most important things together. But then there's also something called an umbrella. So if you could just let's talk about individual insurances that you think are really important for an owner to have, and then explain the concept of an umbrella over that.
Yeah. So before we get into the umbrella, we have one other thing we want to touch on because we talked about your stuff, your property. We talked about business interruption. A business owner policy, which is a very common way of insuring a small restaurant. Okay, this might not be there for the larger mid-market type thing, but most of small business America is going to fall under a business owner policy. You might hear me call that a BOP, B-O-P. Okay,
Gotcha.
So there's three components for a BOP: your property, which we talked about; your business interruption, which we talked about; and the other one, which is invisible, and that's your general liability. So those three components all comprise the BOP. Okay. General liability is there, for the things like a slip, trip, and fall. Customers walking in, they slip on the banana peel. Maybe they twist their ankle in the parking lot. Maybe the server, trips and spills a tray full of coffees all over your lap. Those are the types of injuries that could happen to a guest. All right. This isn't employee injuries. These are all guest related. Somebody comes into your establishment and gets hurt. So the general liability to me is, it's invisible. Nobody thinks about it, but the world is very opportunistic in how they view things.
It's a litigious society is what it is.
It really is. And that's the unfortunate part is there's so many things that you can say, well, common sense, why would this be an issue? Well, it doesn't matter about common sense. It matters that every 5-year-old kid in kindergarten can sing the jingles to 3 or 4 personal injury attorney, in town. So,
yep, you're right.
If somebody gets hurt, the knee-jerk reaction is used to, and you want to protect against that. The best way to do that, if you're a small restaurant, is the BOP. Right? You get that business owner policy. You've now taken care of those three key components: your general liability, your property, your business interruption.
I don't want to confuse anyone, but in doing a little bit of research on this, you got a GL policy, of course, but then I'm also seeing something called operations coverage and premises coverage that seems to have some overlap, but there's some differences. Is that included in a BOP, or is that separate? And can you clarify what those things are?
So I can clarify, and I can also muddy the waters a lot at the same time while I do it. So, when you start to hear about things like operations and premises, a lot of that comes down to where the situations occur. Okay. And before I answer any further, I'm going to just take a small step back. Please. The BOP, when I mentioned the three key components, within that, there's a lot of other moving parts. Okay. So when you look at some of the other coverages that could potentially come into play, they fall into those three categories. Okay. So when you say somebody has a general liability policy, you're talking about the potential of having a singular policy that only covers general liability. But what I'm suggesting is that a business owner policy has multiple layers of coverage built into one, tight little bundle. All right. It's one policy that covers those three components. Okay. And within that, some of the things that you're talking about are being addressed, where if you get a general liability, you get a property, you get a business interruption, and they're three separate policies, they may not match up as cleanly. Does that make sense?
It does. Okay.
So, I'm answering your question without answering it directly. And the reason for that partly is because not all policies are going to be identical in how the BOP is structured, but the spirit in which they are constructed is the same.
Now, employer practices is something separate and distinct, is it not? Because one of the biggest risks right now is all these harassment issues that seem to be happening more frequently than ever. And a lot of businesses, restaurants included, are not experts at handling this. I know the industry is taking pains to have greater education about certain types of harassment in a business, but still, that doesn't necessarily protect a business. Even though they're putting their best practices in place, they can still be sued by an employee that is harassed, right? So let's talk about that. I mean, that's something that would be an add-on, but it's vitally important to have.
Yeah, so an employment practices policy, and the business owner policy can potentially have that endorsed into the bundle. It can also be a standalone. So there's different ways that can be treated. But employment practices, you hit the nail on the head. Harassment is huge. Okay. Employment practices is not just about employees, but it's also potentially about hiring practices.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Discriminatory practices, all those types of things.
The government has defined what is a protected class, right? And that protection class has expanded in my lifetime. It used to be a very basic, you can't discriminate based on, color, religious beliefs, but that's expanded. Good. It should. We should be protecting people and not discriminating based on who they are, right? But if anybody perceives that they've been discriminated against, you now potentially have a lawsuit. And the employment practices liability is going to be there, to protect against that. So it's not just about, the employees that are working for you, but the people that are applying to be your employee that might feel that you didn't hire them for an unjust reason. But the harassment within the industry, you have employees that, and again, I have a ton of experience in it. My son's working it. There's a lot of harassment that is present when you have a lot of people that are potentially younger. It's a very high activity, high excitement type of environment. You kind of get where I'm going. There's
sometimes alcohol is involved too, especially at the end of the shift when, half the employees are hanging around having drinks after hours, shift drinks, that kind of thing. And the next thing you know, it's like, and then, wow, bang, you're in the middle of something that even though you do your best to discourage it, it's like these things are happening like all the time.
But one person's idea of a good time is another person's idea of harassment. And it's not about the intent. It's about the end result, right? Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean that I meant to harass you. I did because you felt that way. And that's where the employment practices, you might hear me just flip and call it EPL, but EPL is there to protect the business owner because at the end of the day, you're the one that's responsible for the activities that are going on in your establishment.
Is there a typical dollar monetary value assigned to a harassment suit that you see generally? And if so, let's just say it's $500,000, and I'm just pulling that out of the air, but what would be a typical cost of that policy to prevent something like that from happening to your business that could put you out of business?
Well, I mean, a policy that's a known cost as opposed to the unknown of what the claim might be.
Mm-hmm. True.
Policy that's going to be, based on scale. So the larger the restaurant, the larger the exposure, the larger the premium.
Number of employees, all that sort of thing.
Number of employees. Yeah, absolutely. A big part of it.
Gotcha.
There are other variables in there. Like, do you have things like an employee handbook or an HR provider that is giving you guidance on how to handle certain situations? A lot of times things can be remedied just by having an established written practice, right? It doesn't mean that it absolves you of all responsibility, but it certainly helps when you can tell people, hey, I told you that in writing and you signed off on it, that if you have a harassment situation, this is the chain of command that you escalate things to, and then this is how we proceed, right? When you don't have that, the absence of the defined process now makes attorneys salivate because they see the opportunity. A claim that's not settled, if it's settled out of court, it's typically much lower than if it goes through, a jury process, right? If you're in a civil liability case, bring out the Benjamins, it's going to be a lot higher, usually about 3 or 4 times higher.
Gotcha. That makes that really clear. We're in the business of selling perishable products that only have a limited shelf life. Spoilage is common. Date coding things is so critical to stay on top of things. Food safety service policies such as ServSafe is super important. But then even though you do the best of things, you get the best of intentions, you got really good best practices within a restaurant. What happens if one of your suppliers sells you something that's tainted and you don't know about it and you serve that and somebody gets violently sick or even worse happens?
Right.
Obviously, there's a product liability policy too. But is the vendor going to cover a restaurant if it can be proven that they caused the problem, even though the restaurant itself gets sued? Or is there a bridge that you need with a product liability policy just to cover yourself?
That is an awesome question that has a lot of layers, and it's hard to give you a clean answer because you asked and answered it a little bit, where will a vendor provide coverage? The big question is if you can prove it. If I can prove that it was tainted, if I can prove that there was something else, proving things may or may not be possible. So at the end of the day, a claim is going to start from the source and potentially work its way backward, right? You're the one that served me the bad meal, so I'm going to look to you first. If you can prove that the source of food was the issue and not you, now we're moving backwards. But can you prove it? Who knows? And if you can prove it, why didn't you prevent it in the first place? Is probably the next question that's going to come up. But there's a lot of variables that are there, and the answer that I give people when those things come up, not just in your example, but in others that are similar, it's not whether I can prove it. It's, do I want to leave it to chance that something that's outside of my control is now going to impact my livelihood? All right. If I focus on what I have control over, I have control over my operations and what I'm doing and how I'm protecting those operations, right? If something comes into play that I can't control that there was a recalled item that I already served because they didn't recall it, right? It's outside of my control. I needed to protect what I did control, and that was the food that I prepared and served, and how I'm ensuring my business properly. Does that?
It does. That totally answers that question. And I guess to take it one step further, one, how deep are your pockets to defend a lawsuit, to go after a bigger company that's got legal firepower? And how long will this process drag out in the courts while you're being sued immediately and your business is at stake, right?
Exactly. And even if you have the financial means to do it, is that the best way to spend your money?
No, clearly not.
Right. When you think of the cost to insure some of these things, it's a known expense that you can just bake into your business plan, right? I know what it's going to cost me for my business owner policy, my EPLI, my workers' comp. Those are things that I've got budgeted, and that's how I'm pricing my food, right? I know what my expenses are. I know what my projections are going to look like. We're good. The unknown scares people, right? And even if I have the money, it doesn't mean I want to spend it that way.
So your company, CoverWallet, obviously works with lots of the biggest carriers out there. And what I want to talk about is, what is the process specifically when you got a new client on the phone or you meet with them personally and you evaluate their needs? And it varies dramatically. We talked about leasing versus owning the real estate, the size of the property, the number of employees, the annual revenues, all these things come into play. Is there just sort of a checklist that you have and you ask all the questions and then you get a really good picture of what that business is all about, and then you can start to make recommendations, and then you go to all those carriers and you shop it around and you try to get the best price on, the BOP and all the other things? Is that typically the process? I don't want to tell you how you do your business. I'm just curious how you would approach it.
You just described it perfectly.
Okay. Awesome.
The whole premise behind CoverWallet is we work in the insurtech space, if you want to call it that. So, it's a very high tech way of approaching things. You mentioned the checklist. It's all built into an online form that will ask the pertinent questions that we need to know for the various lines of insurance that you may be interested in purchasing, right? So whether it's the business owner policy, workers' comp, EPLI, cyber is another one that's big. And I never answered your umbrella question, but that would be
we'll
on
get
there
to
too.
that. Okay.
We'll get to that. So, all of those things are going to be built into it, asking the appropriate questions to make sure that we're taking it to the right markets to get quotes. Okay. And now that takes care of the tech side of things. On the insurance side of things, we partner with a tremendous amount of insurance companies all across the United States. CoverWallet is a division of Aon. So a lot of people think of Aon being, big business, because it is, but CoverWallet is there for that micro, small commercial space. We're there for those smaller restaurants. And when I say smaller, I don't mean tiny. I mean, we're talking, under 150 employees, under 10 million in revenue. There's a lot of small restaurants are going to fit that description, because that's probably about 80-90% of them in the U.S. anyways. So we're there to offer the insurance coverage for those folks that are in an underserved market.
We're talking about risk as being the basis for a large part of the cost of being insured. And there's so many weather events going on across the country, the deep south. I mean, they're getting nailed with tornadoes, and certain areas of the country are susceptible to hurricanes and all this kind of stuff. And statistics would show that certain regions of this country are obviously bigger, higher risks. Does that mean that they are not coverable, that certain carriers avoid those particular businesses because, one, it's a high-risk business, and two, it's a high-risk state or location? Are you seeing any of that? And if so, if they will cover, is it very, very expensive based on that risk?
So there's a lot of ways that can be handled. Okay. So I'm going to try to give you a very general answer to something that could be very state, county, municipality, or just proximity to water situation, right? When you have something like weather-related events, we'll just say high winds, right? The answer that I give you for the state of Florida right on the coast is going to be a lot different than the wind answer that I give you for, Midwest. Okay. There's still a lot of winds. There's a high propensity for those things to happen, but the way that they're handled, the way that they're priced, the way that they may be underwritten could be vastly different, because there's a difference between tornadoes and hurricanes. Still wind, but the likelihood of things being, a massive event versus a very isolated event is going to be viewed differently, right? Weather is problematic in some parts of the country. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The closer you are to a coast, the closer you are to a combination of water and wind, it doesn't mean that you can't buy it. It just means that it's going to be a little bit trickier to find, and it could be more expensive.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so many industries are affected by catastrophic loss. I mean, out in the western states, the wildfires and the amount of destruction and devastation that happens to residences and businesses. You wonder how we bounce back from this when it happens year after year after year. And the amount of, you add all that up and it's in the billions of dollars of losses.
There is.
And somehow all that has to be factored into insurance.
It does. And sometimes the answer is, the way to make it more affordable is for the business owner to take on a little bit more of the risk than they would have if they weren't in that situation, right? I don't want to sound callous when I say it, but you had the choice of where you opened your restaurant. You chose to put it on right in the heart of South Beach, Miami, as opposed to St. Louis, Missouri.
I get it.
I realize, your choice is also based on where you live. I get it. But because you've taken the choice to be in a place that's a little bit higher risk, you may have to take on a little bit more of the risk yourself. That could be in the form of a larger deductible that you pay on the property, okay, just to help keep the premiums in check. Really no different than, our favorite topic, health insurance. The days of going to the doctor for free when you had a little sniffle are gone. You now have copays and deductibles, and that's a way of keeping those prices in check, and property coverage in a high wind area is no different.
That answers that one. Let's go back to the umbrella now. Give us the overview of what an umbrella does and how it works.
So, umbrellas are, it's the simplest thing to talk about, really, but it's sometimes the hardest for people to fully grasp. An umbrella is there for additional liability protection above and beyond what you have for your underlying policies. Okay. So if all I have is a business owner policy and I don't have other things that could be liability related, the umbrella would just sit on top of that. So if I had a business owner policy that has, say, $1 million in general liability coverage, I could buy a $10 million umbrella that sits on top of that. If I have a liability claim that's only $500,000, my umbrella never gets involved. But if I do have a claim that exceeds that $1 million that the business owner policy had for its limit, now the umbrella kicks in because I've exhausted the underlying policy. Okay. Where an umbrella becomes even more valuable is when you have additional policies beyond just the business owner policy that could have liability coverage, like a commercial auto. Let's say I'm a small Italian restaurant and I deliver, little catering things here or there. I come to CoverWallet today because I wanted to have lunch for my team. The delivery person that has the commercial auto van that has liability. The umbrella sits on top of that as well. Okay. There could be others too. So it's really additional liability above and beyond what the underlying limits might be. And the reason you would do that is not all policies can have unlimited limits. So you might have an insurance company that has a business owner policy that says, we won't go above 2 million. We'll do 2 million. That's our limit. We won't go beyond that, but you really want 10. You need the umbrella.
That makes perfect sense. Thanks for clarifying. You mentioned something that triggers a thought. You mentioned delivery. It's hugely controversial in restaurants right now using these third-party delivery services that are taking so much of the check, a large percentage, but yet it's built businesses. It's brought in lots of incremental revenue, but it has a cost to it. But you might be thinking of putting your own, well, in my own case, I had restaurants and we did our own delivery service. And obviously the drivers used their own cars, but there was an insurance policy covering that. And there was an expense to it, but there was a return on that investment because we had a large delivery business. Is it really incrementally expensive where now suddenly you've got teenage kids running around in their cars delivering food and all that kind of stuff, and there's sort of an incentive to get the food there quickly, and therefore there's a high risk to it, and therefore it's expensive? But would you say, I guess here's where I'm going with this, do you see it being any more cost effective to try to do your own delivery versus paying those higher fees, even if it exposes you to a certain amount of risk?
I mean, there's more to it than just the insurance answer, right? You know, I'm buying or leasing a delivery vehicle of some sort, van, you know, SUV, car, whatever it is. So there's the cost of the vehicle. There's the cost of the employee that I'm paying and all the other costs that go along with that, your payroll taxes and, you know, workers' comp and other things. I don't know that I have a clean answer on whether or not it's the most cost-effective way to own your own versus using a service. There's so many other variables to it that there's probably not a clean answer. I just know that if you're in an industry that has that perception that time is you know, critical, the pizza is going to be there in 30 minutes or it's free, right? I know nobody advertises it that way anymore. No, for good reason, but the perception is still there. The pizza delivery, not to pick on pizza, but I had it for lunch. It's the most common, sure. It's very common, and traditionally, it is a younger driver. Younger drivers are also less experienced. They're also more costly on a personal insurance side of things. So allowing them to drive your vehicle, it's just going to cost a lot.
All right. Thanks for answering that.
Yeah. An 18-year-old kid lives up to our expectations of them when they're behind the wheel.
Well, it's kind of a stereotype, isn't it? I mean, but you said it. It's young, it's inexperienced, and it's like there's, again, statistics that bear that out also, you know?
Yeah, it's a stereotype that unfortunately has also been earned over time, and that's why the statistics, you know, kind of prove that to be the case. They are more likely to have that accident.
Rockstars, there are many elements to consider when growing your restaurant. Are you connecting with diners enough and with the right message? Could your kitchen be putting out more orders than your dining areas have room for? Well, it can be overwhelming, especially when the reason you got into this business is for the food and the people. That's why restaurants get Pop Menu. Pop Menu is the marketing tech platform designed to make growing your restaurant easy, so you don't have to grow it alone. With Pop Menu, you can capture more guests and their preferences through your restaurant's website that's designed to easily collect contact information and data so you can see what your guests love and why they dine with you. Connect and build authentic relationships with guests by using modern technology that personalizes marketing. Make all your systems work better together, improve margins, and conquer the chaos of your restaurant's digital presence. Pop Menu has a special offer for my listeners. For a limited time, get $100 off your first month, plus lock in one unchanging monthly rate at popmenu.com/rockstars. Go now to get $100 off your first month at popmenu.com/rockstars. Listen, you've heard a lot of noise about the ERC tax credit. Why is it such a big deal? Because your business already paid a ton of money in payroll taxes, and more than likely, you qualify to get a ton of money back. Now, if you haven't applied yet, I'm telling you, drop everything, drop what you're doing, and figure out how to get it done. The truth is, and I'm speaking from experience here, it's super easy to get the money back if you let an expert do the work for you. Now get on this before the government either changes the program or runs out of money. I got hundreds of thousands of dollars back from my restaurant, and it literally saved our business. Now, you may have heard it may take many months after applying to get your money back, but that doesn't have to be the case. If you need your ERC refund sooner to run your business or to take care of some much-needed projects, you can speak with Karen Garbett, the owner of Verge Funding Group, about a bridge loan or other working capital. Now, whether you wait for your check, opt for a bridge loan, or other working capital, it's likely you have a significant amount of money due back to you, so don't lose it. Now go to the show notes for this episode on our website and use Karen's calendar link to set up a time to chat with her personally about how much money your business can get back.
Let's shift gears. You mentioned the word technology a moment ago, and obviously tech keeps moving forward, and it's staggering what is out there. And then there's also staggering about breaches. So now we're talking about cybersecurity, and I know you've got a lot of expertise in that. For some reason, restaurants are susceptible to cyber attacks, and why would you say that is, and what happens? I mean, what are you normally seeing these days with that sort of thing?
So depending on the source you look at, the restaurant and hospitality industry is either the number one or number two most targeted industry in small business America for cyber attacks.
Volume of credit cards, is that a lot of it? Or
that could certainly be part of the reason why. I mean, people rob banks because that's where the money is, right?
Sure.
People go after the businesses that have access to information that we want. One thing that has really become prevalent with a lot of restaurants, especially since the pandemic started, was loyalty programs, right? And if it's a loyalty program, you have access to pretty much all the personal identifiable information that the bad guys want. We have your credit card information. We know your birthday. We know where you live. We know so much about you. And those are the types of things that, will now make it that much easier for them to use that info against you in a different industry, right? So restaurants are very much targeted, unfortunately. There's a lot of access points that make it a little bit easier for people to do it. It's not just hacking into your Wi-Fi. It's your POS system. It's your robot server or bartender. I was in Chicago for the National Restaurant a couple of weeks back, and I'm telling you, I saw the future.
I was there too. The volume of tech, it was like 80% of the show is robots and tech, isn't it?
It's unbelievable, isn't it? Even though
crazy.
It may not be tomorrow that this happens, it is tomorrow. It is going to happen, and I'm seeing it happen now. I went out to dinner with my family last week, and there was a robot server bringing, food to a table. It's there. That's a Wi-Fi controlled device. Okay. At the end of the night, they lock R2D2 up, but what if somebody does a smash and grab? They drive a stolen Kia through your storefront, and I'm not being, I'm not using hyperbole when I say this. This is reality.
You've seen it happen.
I've seen it happen. Somebody drives a stolen car through the front of the restaurant. They take the robot server, and now they can, find ways to hack into it and get the information that's an access point.
That's
Those
crazy.
are the things that are happening, and this is an industry that is, number one or number two in small business America. It's happening already. And even if the claims are on a smaller level per individual, it becomes big when you look at just the sheer number of people that could be potentially impacted.
Are there any telltale signs if a business is sort of being attacked and the hacker is like dancing around the edge but hasn't quite breached yet, but you start seeing little glitches? Are there any warning signs, or bang, it just happens and now you got a problem?
I think the answer is yes, there are, but will a person necessarily have been recognized that it happened? Okay. I'll give you an example. I work for, a fairly large company. I got an email from the HR department on Friday last week saying, congratulations, you passed our phishing test. So there was an email that was sent to me, don't know when, that was testing to see if I would click on something that I wasn't supposed to click on. All right. I didn't know that I passed a test because I didn't know I was taking one.
Sure, of course.
All
completely out of the blue, yeah.
Right. And I don't know anybody, I'm sure this has happened to you recently. Everybody gets those emails that are saying, your your Amazon account is frozen, your PayPal account is frozen, or they've gotten really, really good with things that, you were expecting to get an email on. You're like, wait a minute, this email address doesn't look right. It's a constant barrage of emails from people trying to get you to click something that will then open up, some form of malware, spyware, ransomware that now holds your systems hostage. Okay. Now, are servers and bartenders and cooks going to even have work email? Yeah, probably not. Maybe the kitchen manager will, the office, whatever. Most people aren't going to have that, but all it takes is one
opening. Yep.
So that can certainly happen. I mean, it happens all the time. And, Monday I opened my mail and I had something from my dental insurance saying that my information was subject to a hack that happened in May. I went for my routine teeth cleaning, and somehow that claim that got sent to my dental insurer was hijacked in the Ethernet. And now I've got to go through a year's worth of, data integrity scrubbing for the, Experian or whoever it was that mailed me the letter. I'm like, it happens everywhere. It happened with my dentist. It can happen at my son's restaurant next. It's become so commonplace that people don't even think about it. And that's the problem. Yeah. They're not thinking about it because it happens constantly. And that's when we start to let our guard down and we don't realize what the financial impact as a business owner is.
And especially restaurant owners that are trying to put out the daily fires and serve all the great food and keep all the balls in the air. And then all of a sudden, one split second of letting your guard down, something looks reasonable or recognizable and you click it and then, now look what happened, right?
Well, and here's another one that sounds ridiculous, but I'm telling you it's true. I will not tell you the name of the restaurant that's happened.
You don't have to identify, but the stories are good.
But, if you're an owner or a manager and you're sick and tired of telling the people that are running the POS system what the reset password is to get back in because the credit card, crashed or whatever, and I need to know the password. I've actually been in more than one place where I've seen the password taped on the device.
Wow. Yikes. Yeah. Well, there's a word of the wise right there. You just gave us a valuable piece of advice to protect ourselves, and it's that simple.
Yeah. And every password is easy to hack. We all can guess what they are. I mean, it's unbelievable how security is so important, but people get annoyed by it. I mean, I'd be lying if I said I'm not frustrated by the number of passwords that I have to memorize. And then they're always being reset on a different cycle. So I have to remember, did I reset this one already or not? And then I get locked out. And then I feel like I have to reset all of them. We all have those frustrations. So we all keep them the same, which we're not supposed to do. That's why cyber is so important.
Here's a overlap question on the cybersecurity topic. Let's just say we opt to have cyber protection. I'm curious because sometimes this could shut a restaurant down for days or weeks, right? It's possible. And if that's the case, do you also need business interruption, or is there sort of an element of cyber protection that includes business interruption? Do you need both? How would you answer that?
A lot of the cyber policies will include business interruption as a result of that.
All right, that's good.
I say a lot because they're not all created equal, and there are some bells and whistles that some have that others may not. But business interruption is definitely something that is pretty consistent across the board with those guys.
Okay. Now, there's a hugely controversial topic. More and more restaurants are starting to explore artificial intelligence and this whole ChatGPT thing. And part of it has really, really good implications. Another part has that criminal element and attacks and using it for obviously illicit purposes and dangerous practices. Do you see any insurance now that will cover those types of things? Is that included in the cyber policy specifically?
So that's a really good question.
It's just something that popped into my head because it's been all over the news lately,
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I always tell people that, when you come up with an AI that can replicate me, good luck. but they haven't
one of a
gotten there
kind,
yet.
John. You're one of a kind.
I try. We haven't met my kids. I'm one of three. But the AI is something that is